did you make sure your sister's pettiness backfired completely? My sister Tori deliberately left my suitcase at home when we went on our Miami trip in April. I'd packed everything perfectly for the 5-day beach vacation with our friend group, and Tori was supposed to load the bags while I parked the rental van. She loaded everyone else's luggage but mysteriously forgot mine even though it was sitting right next to hers by the door. I didn't realize until we were at the airport and she acted shocked, saying she thought I'd grabbed it myself. She knew I was parking the van and couldn't have grabbed anything, but she kept insisting it was my responsibility to double-check. She said I should have reminded her specifically about my bag if it was so important. Our friends felt bad, but we were already at check-in, and the flight was in 2 hours. Tori suggested I just buy some clothes when we got there and said it would be fun shopping in Miami anyway. She knew I'd spent $300 on new outfits for this trip, specifically because our friend Mia was bringing her cousin who worked at a modeling agency. I'd bought specific pieces to look professional but beachy since Mia said her cousin might have internship opportunities. Tori knew this and still left my suitcase behind. On the plane, Tori kept making comments about how forgetful I was and how she couldn't believe I didn't check the trunk. She told our friends that I'd always been scattered and this was typical behavior for me. She said at least I'd learn a lesson about being more organized. Our friend Holly asked why Tori didn't notice my bright red suitcase was missing when she loaded everything else. Tori said she was focused on her own stuff and wasn't my keeper. She actually smirked when she said it. When we landed in Miami, Tori made a big show of lending me one of her cover-ups to wear from the airport. It was see-through and barely covered anything, but she said beggars can't be choosers. She told everyone we passed that her poor sister forgot her luggage and wasn't it generous that she was sharing? At the hotel, I asked Tori if I could borrow some clothes until I could buy new ones. She said she only packed enough for herself and didn't have extras. This was a lie because Tori always overpacks and brings double of everything. She said I could maybe borrow one outfit for dinner, but it would be the one she picked. She chose her ugliest dress that was 2 sizes too big and made me look like I was wearing a tent. During dinner, Mia's cousin Alex arrived and Tori immediately started telling her how I'd stupidly left my suitcase at home. She said I was always doing things like this and she constantly had to take care of me. Alex looked uncomfortable and said these things happen to everyone. Tori laughed and said not to everyone, just to people who don't pay attention. That night I discovered why Tori had done this. She'd been talking to Alex online for weeks trying to get an internship at her agency. She didn't want competition from me, so she sabotaged my appearance for the trip. She figured if I looked messy and disorganized, Alex wouldn't take me seriously as a candidate. She even told our friend Jenna that she needed this opportunity more than I did because she actually had talent. The next morning, I went shopping, but Tori had another surprise. She'd borrowed my credit card from my wallet while I was sleeping and maxed it out buying herself designer swimsuits and shoes. When I tried to buy clothes, my card was declined. Tori said she thought I'd said she could use it and offered to lend me $50 for the inconvenience. $50 in Miami bought me one cheap sundress from a tourist shop. That's when I decided Tori needed to learn what it felt like to be sabotaged. I started by borrowing Tori's phone while she was in the shower and sending a message to Alex from Tori's account. The message said that Tori thought Alex's agency was a stepping stone, and she was only interested in using the connection to get to bigger agencies. I wrote that Tori had called the agency small time compared to where she really wanted to work. Then I deleted the message from Tori's sent folder. Next, I took all of Tori's carefully planned outfits and mixed them up. She had everything organized by day, an activity with shoes and accessories matched. I put Monday's top with Thursday's bottom, mixed all the shoes in different bags, and tangled her jewelry together. When she got dressed, nothing matched and she couldn't find complete outfits. She looked ridiculous in mismatched patterns and wrong shoes. While Tori was frantically trying to fix her outfits, I had a conversation with Alex about my situation. I explained how my sister had deliberately left my luggage and maxed out my credit card because she was threatened by competition. Alex was appalled and said that kind of behavior showed terrible character. She said she could never work with someone who sabotaged family members for personal gain. At the beach photo shoot that Mia had arranged, Tori showed up in clashing colors because she couldn't find her matching pieces. She stood there under the bright Miami sun looking like someone who got dressed in the dark, and I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. The bright orange top clashed so hard with those purple striped pants that the photographer kept squinting at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Mia covered her mouth with her hand, and I could tell she was fighting back a laugh at how ridiculous my sister looked. One of Tori's sandals was white with silver buckles, and the other was tan with gold straps, and every time she shifted her weight you could see how different they were. The photographer cleared his throat and adjusted his camera, probably wondering if this was some kind of joke he wasn't in on. That's when Alex walked down the beach path and stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might fly off her face, and she stared at Tori's outfit like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Tori noticed Alex looking, and her whole face turned red, but she tried to act like everything was fine. She started babbling about how she was going for an experimental look, something about mixing unexpected patterns to create visual tension. Her voice shook the whole time, and she kept tugging at the orange top like she could somehow make it look better. Alex nodded slowly but didn't say anything, and I could see the other girls in our group exchanging looks. The photographer finally spoke up and suggested maybe Tori wanted to change into something that matched better for the professional photos. He said it really nicely, but you could tell he thought her outfit was a disaster. Tori's face went from red to white, and she practically ran back toward the hotel, her mismatched sandals kicking up sand as she moved. I watched her dig through her beach bag looking for her room key, and she was moving so fast that everything fell out onto the sand. She scooped it all up and took off toward the building, and I knew she was going to tear apart her suitcase trying to find clothes that actually went together. As soon as Tori was out of sight, I moved closer to Alex and Mia. I kept my voice light and a little worried, like I was genuinely concerned about my sister instead of being the person who caused all this. I mentioned that Tori had been acting really strange this whole trip, doing things that weren't like her at all. Alex turned to look at me, and I made sure my face showed nothing but sisterly concern. Mia nodded and said she'd noticed Tori seemed stressed, and I agreed that something was definitely off with her lately. Alex asked me directly what happened with my luggage situation. I took a breath and told her the truth about how Tori was supposed to load all the bags, but somehow forgot mine even though it was sitting right next to hers. I explained how Tori knew I was parking the van and couldn't have grabbed it myself, and how she kept insisting it was my fault for not double-checking. Holly and Jenna had moved closer to listen, and they looked at each other when I mentioned the credit card thing. Jenna's eyes got really wide, and Holly shook her head slightly, and I could tell they were starting to see a pattern in Tori's behavior. I didn't have to make myself sound like a victim, because the facts did that on their own. Tori came back about 15 minutes later wearing a navy blue sundress that actually looked decent. Her hair was messy from running and changing so fast, and she had this angry energy radiating off her that made everyone step back a little. She looked right at me with this expression that could have melted steel, and I knew in that moment she'd figured out I was the one who mixed up her clothes. She didn't say anything, but her jaw was clenched, so tight I thought her teeth might crack. The photographer tried to get everyone positioned for the group shots, but Tori kept standing as far from me as possible. The rest of the photo shoot was painful to watch. Tori couldn't relax no matter how many times the photographer told her to smile naturally and have fun. She looked stiff in every single picture, her shoulders up by her ears and her smile not reaching her eyes at all. The photographer kept trying different poses and angles, asking her to think about something that made her happy, but nothing worked. You could see the anger and embarrassment all over her face, and I started to feel a tiny bit bad about what I'd done. Just a tiny bit, though, because she'd left my entire suitcase at home on purpose. After we finished taking pictures, our whole group walked to this beachfront restaurant for lunch. The place had tables right on the sand with big umbrellas and a view of the ocean. Tori made sure to sit at the complete opposite end of the table from me, squeezing in between Jenna and one of the other girls. She kept leaning over to whisper things to Jenna, and I could see Jenna's face getting more and more uncomfortable with whatever Tori was saying. Jenna kept glancing at me and then back at Tori, like she didn't know what to believe anymore. We'd barely ordered our food when Alex touched my arm and asked if she could talk to me privately for a minute. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like I was on a roller coaster, and my hands got sweaty as I followed her away from the table. We walked over to the railing that separated the restaurant from the beach, and Alex had this serious look on her face. She said she'd gotten a really strange message from Tori last night, and I had to focus on keeping my breathing normal. This was happening way sooner than I expected, and I hadn't prepared what I was going to say. I made my eyes go wide and asked what the message said, trying to sound confused and concerned. Alex pulled out her phone and showed me the screen, explaining that Tori had apparently called her agency small time and said she was only using the connection as a stepping stone. She said Tori wrote that she wanted to get to bigger agencies, and this was just a starting point. I stared at the message and felt my face get hot, knowing I was the one who'd written those words pretending to be my sister. Alex paused and studied my face for a long second, like she was trying to figure out if I was telling the truth or hiding something from her. She said the message didn't really sound like the Tori she'd been talking to online for the past few weeks, and that Tori had always seemed so professional and excited about the agency and all their other conversations. I could feel my heart beating faster because Alex was basically giving me a chance to admit what I'd done, but I was already too far into this revenge plan to back out now. I forced myself to shrug and suggested that maybe Tori had been drinking when she sent it. You know how people text stupid things when they're drunk. Alex didn't look totally convinced, but she nodded slowly and said that was possible, though it still seemed weird that Tori would say those specific things about the agency. I kept my face as neutral as possible even though my hands were shaking a little bit, and I told Alex that my sister could be really competitive and sometimes said things she didn't mean when she felt threatened. Alex opened her mouth to respond, but then her eyes shifted to something behind me and her expression changed. I turned around and saw Tori walking toward us with this look on her face that made my stomach drop. She came right up to where we were standing and demanded to know what Alex and I were talking about in private. Her voice was loud enough that some of the other people at nearby tables turned to look at us, and I could see Mia and Holly glancing over from where they were sitting. I tried to say it was nothing important, but Tori cut me off and said she knew we were talking about her. She asked Alex directly what I'd been saying and crossed her arms over her chest in this defensive way. Alex looked uncomfortable with how aggressive Tori was being, and honestly, it made my sister look paranoid and guilty, even though I was the one who'd actually done something wrong. Tori kept pushing and asking what we'd been discussing, and her voice got louder with each question. I almost felt bad about how this was playing out because Tori's reaction was making her look worse. But then I remembered the suitcase and the credit card, and the feeling went away pretty fast. Alex held up her phone and showed Tori the screen with the message on it. She asked Tori if she'd sent this last night, and I watched my sister's face go completely white like all the blood had drained out of it. Tori stared at the phone for what felt like forever, her eyes moving back and forth as she read the words I'd written pretending to be her. She started shaking her head and saying she never sent that message, her voice getting higher and more panicked. She insisted someone must have gotten into her phone and sent it without her knowing, and then she looked directly at me with so much anger in her eyes that I had to look away. The accusation was hanging there in the air between us, even though she hadn't actually said my name out loud, and everyone around us could feel the tension. Our other friends had noticed something was wrong, and they started coming over to see what was happening. Reagan walked up and asked what was going on, looking between Tori's pale face and Alex's confused expression, and my guilty one. The whole group was gathering around now, and they were all starting to realize this fight between Tori and me was way bigger than just a forgotten suitcase. Jenna touched Tori's arm and asked if she was okay, and Holly was staring at me like she was trying to figure out if I'd done what Tori was accusing me of. Reagan suggested that maybe we could all just calm down and try to enjoy the rest of the vacation, but the tension was so thick now that nobody was really listening to her. Mia looked stressed because this was supposed to be a fun trip, and instead her cousin was caught in the middle of whatever mess Tori and I had created. Tori grabbed her phone from Alex's hand and started scrolling through it frantically. She went to her sent messages, and I could see her finger moving as she searched for the message Alex had shown her. I'd deleted it from the sent folder, though, so there was no evidence that it had ever been there except for what Alex had received on her end. Tori's face got more and more confused as she kept looking, and then the confusion turned to anger when she realized she couldn't find it. She looked up at Alex and insisted she would never say those things about the agency, that she really respected the work Alex did and thought it was an amazing opportunity. Her voice was shaking, and she kept saying over and over that someone had accessed her phone, and every time she said it, she looked at me with this expression that could have burned a hole through me. Alex said she needed some time to think about the whole internship situation with both of us. She told Tori and me that she'd talk to us later after she had a chance to process everything that had happened. Then she walked away from the table and headed toward the beach, leaving all of us standing there in this awful silence. I watched her go and suddenly realized that my revenge plan might have messed things up for me too, not just for Tori. I'd been so focused on making Tori look bad that I hadn't really thought about how Alex would see me in all of this. Now Alex probably thought both of us were dramatic and unprofessional, and the internship opportunity I'd wanted so badly might be gone for both of us. Tori was still staring at her phone like she couldn't believe what was happening, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes, even though she was trying to hold them back. The rest of the lunch was super awkward, and nobody really knew what to say. We all went back to the hotel after eating, and I went straight to my room hoping to avoid Tori for a while. I'd barely closed the door when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, and then someone was pounding on my door so hard I thought they might break it. I knew it was Tori before I even opened it, and when I did, she pushed past me into the room. She spun around and accused me of sending that fake message to Alex from her phone, her voice shaking with anger. I tried to deny it and told her I didn't know what she was talking about, but my acting wasn't nearly as good as I thought it would be. I could feel the guilt written all over my face, and Tori could see it too, and she knew in that moment that I'd done exactly what she was accusing me of. Tori started screaming that I was just as manipulative as she was, and the worst part was that she was completely right. I wanted to stay calm, but I was too angry to keep quiet, so I started yelling back about how she'd deliberately left my suitcase at home and stolen my credit card. I brought up every single thing she'd done to sabotage me on this trip, and she fired back with her own list of complaints about me. We were both screaming at each other in the hotel hallway, our voices echoing off the walls, and neither of us cared that we were making a scene. She called me petty and vindictive, and I called her jealous and manipulative, and the fight just kept getting louder and more intense. I could hear doors opening down the hallway as other guests came out to see what the noise was about, but we were too caught up in our anger to stop. 2 security guards in hotel uniforms came around the corner and told us we needed to quiet down immediately. One of them said they'd received multiple complaints about the noise, and if we couldn't keep it down, they'd have to move one of us to a different room. Tori and I both shut up right away, standing there glaring at each other and breathing hard from all the yelling. The security guards waited to make sure we were actually going to stay quiet, and then they walked away after giving us a warning. As soon as they were gone, Tori turned and went into her own room, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. I went back into my room and sat on the bed, suddenly realizing that our friends had probably heard every single word of that fight through these thin hotel walls. They knew now that I'd sent the fake message and that Tori had left my luggage on purpose, and they'd heard both of us screaming horrible things at each other. That night we all met for dinner at a restaurant near the hotel, and the whole group was so awkward and quiet that it was painful. Nobody seemed to know what to say or where to look, and the usual jokes and laughter were completely gone. Mia kept glancing between Tori and me with this disappointed expression on her face, like she couldn't believe we'd let things get this bad. I felt genuinely terrible about dragging everyone into our toxic sister drama and ruining what was supposed to be a fun vacation for the whole group. Tori sat at the opposite end of the table and wouldn't even look in my direction, and I could see that some of our friends were trying to decide whose side to take. The food came and we all ate in near silence, and I kept thinking about how this trip had turned into a complete disaster because Tori and I couldn't stop trying to hurt each other. Fiona tried to cheer everyone up by suggesting we go dancing at one of the Miami clubs she'd read about online. She pulled up pictures on her phone showing the neon lights and crowded dance floor, but nobody responded with any real interest. Mia said she was too tired, and Reagan just shook her head without even looking at the photos. The silence that followed Fiona's suggestion felt heavy and uncomfortable, and I watched her put her phone away with this defeated expression on her face. This trip was supposed to be about having fun together and making memories, but instead, Tori and I had turned it into 5 days of fighting and revenge that nobody wanted to be part of. Holly caught my eye across the table and tilted her head toward the restaurant exit, and I knew she wanted to talk to me privately. I followed her outside to the sidewalk where tourists were walking past with shopping bags and beach towels, and the warm Miami air felt thick against my skin. Holly turned to face me with her arms crossed and asked if I'd really sent that message to Alex from Tori's phone. My stomach twisted because I'd been waiting for someone to ask me directly, and now that Holly was standing there looking at me with those serious eyes, I couldn't keep lying. I admitted that I'd done it and explained how I'd grabbed Tori's phone while she was in the shower and typed out the message about her calling Alex's agency small time. Holly's face showed this mix of understanding and disappointment that made me feel worse than if she'd just been angry. She said she got why I did it after everything Tori had done to me, but sending a fake message was still wrong no matter how justified I felt. I tried to explain how angry I'd been about the suitcase and the credit card, but Holly cut me off and said she already knew about all of that. She told me something I hadn't known, which was that Tori had been talking badly about me to the friend group for months before this trip even happened. Holly said Tori would make comments about how I was always trying to compete with her, and how I thought I was better than everyone else. She said Tori acted like she had to constantly take care of me and clean up my mistakes, which was completely backwards from reality. Hearing this made me feel validated because it proved Tori had been sabotaging me all along, but it also made me sad that I hadn't noticed my own sister undermining me to our friends. I asked Holly why she never told me about Tori's comments, and she said she'd thought it was just normal sister stuff and didn't realize how toxic it actually was. I looked down at my sandals and asked Holly if she thought I should come clean to Alex about the fake message. Holly was quiet for a moment and then said that decision was up to me. But either way, I needed to accept that my revenge had made me look just as bad as Tori. She said both of us were acting terrible, and the whole friend group was uncomfortable watching us destroy each other. I went back to my hotel room that night feeling sick about everything that had happened. The next morning, I woke up with this heavy feeling in my chest, like something was sitting on top of me. Sunlight was coming through the curtains and I could hear people laughing by the pool outside, but I just lay there thinking about how I'd become exactly the kind of person I hated. I'd wanted Tori to face consequences for sabotaging me, but instead I'd turned into someone who lies and manipulates and hurts people on purpose. The worst part was knowing that Alex was right to turn down both of us for internships because we'd both shown we couldn't be trusted. I got dressed slowly and headed down to breakfast at the hotel restaurant, dreading having to face everyone after yesterday's disaster. Kiana was already sitting at a table with her coffee and waved me over when she saw me. I sat down across from her and she got straight to the point, saying she'd noticed both Tori and I had been acting terrible this whole trip. She didn't pick sides or try to defend either of us, just made it clear that we were both responsible for ruining the group dynamic that was supposed to make this vacation fun. Kiana said she'd come on this trip to relax and enjoy time with friends, not to watch two sisters try to destroy each other in increasingly creative ways. I looked around the restaurant and spotted Tori sitting at a different table with Jenna, and I could see that Tori was crying. Her shoulders were shaking and Jenna had her arm around her, and part of me felt satisfied seeing Tori upset after everything she'd done. But a bigger part of me felt guilty for taking things this far, because watching my sister cry across a restaurant made me realize how much damage we'd both caused. Sterling walked over to my table and pulled out a chair, sitting down with this serious expression I'd never seen on him before. He suggested that maybe Tori and I needed to actually talk to each other instead of just attacking back and forth. He offered to mediate a conversation between us if we wanted, and I reluctantly agreed, because the current situation was completely unbearable. Sterling went over to Tori's table and I watched him talking to her quietly while Jenna listened. Tori looked over at me and then shook her head hard, and I could see her saying something angry to Sterling. He came back and told me Tori refused to talk, saying I was a liar and a manipulator and she had nothing to say to me until I admitted what I did to Alex. I felt frustrated because I'd already confessed to Holly, but apparently that wasn't enough for Tori. I spent the rest of that day at the beach by myself while everyone else went to do group activities together. They'd planned to go jet skiing and then have lunch at some seafood place Mia had found, but nobody invited me and I didn't blame them. I sat on my towel watching families build sandcastles and couples walk along the water, and the loneliness hit me harder than I expected. Being excluded from the group made me realize how much I'd lost by focusing on revenge instead of just enjoying the vacation we'd all planned together. I'd spent hundreds of dollars and used vacation days from work for this trip, and instead of good memories, I was going home with nothing but regret and damaged friendships. I walked back to my hotel room after the beach and checked my phone. There was a text from Mia asking if I was doing okay and saying she wished the trip hadn't turned into such a mess. She wrote that she felt bad because she'd invited both Tori and me knowing we had problems with each other. I sat on my bed and typed back an apology for making her vacation terrible and thanked her for checking on me. Her response came fast, saying that Tori and I both needed to work on our issues because this pattern of attacking each other was really unhealthy. She said we couldn't keep doing this to ourselves and everyone around us. I knew she was right, but I didn't know how to fix things when Tori still hadn't admitted what she did with my luggage and credit card. The sun was setting outside my window, and I felt completely alone in this hotel room, while everyone else was probably having fun together somewhere. I changed into the cheap sundress I'd bought and brushed my hair trying to look decent, even though I felt like garbage inside. Someone knocked on my door around 7, and when I opened it, Alex was standing there asking if we could talk privately on the balcony. My stomach twisted because I knew this conversation was coming, and I had to choose whether to keep lying or tell the truth. We walked to the balcony at the end of the hallway where you could see the ocean and the Miami skyline lit up. Alex leaned against the railing and looked at me with this serious expression that made my hands shake. She said she'd been thinking about everything that happened, and something about the whole situation didn't make sense to her. Then she asked me straight out if I'd sent that message from Tori's phone, and I could tell from her eyes that she already knew the answer. My throat felt tight and I tried to think of another lie, but I couldn't do it anymore. I started crying and admitted everything, including the fake message and mixing up all of Tori's outfits. The words came out fast as I tried to explain about the luggage being left behind on purpose, and Tori maxing out my credit card while I was sleeping. I told Alex how Tori had sabotaged me because she didn't want competition for the internship, and how I just wanted her to feel what it was like to be treated that way. Alex listened without interrupting, and her face stayed calm even though I was falling apart. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a minute, looking out at the ocean. Then she said she appreciated me being honest now, but the fact that I was willing to sabotage my own sister for an internship showed I had bad character. She told me she couldn't offer opportunities to either of us because we'd both shown we couldn't be trusted to act professionally. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach because I'd lost the internship and made myself look awful in front of everyone. Alex added that if Tori and I didn't figure out our problems, we were just going to keep destroying chances for both of us. She said she hoped we could work things out because it was sad watching two sisters hurt each other like this. Then she went back inside and left me standing on the balcony alone. I stayed there for a while, watching the lights on the water and feeling completely empty. I'd wanted to teach Tori a lesson about what it felt like to be sabotaged, but instead I'd just proved we were both capable of doing terrible things to each other. The ocean breeze felt cold on my face, and I realized I'd become exactly what I hated about my sister. I went back to my room and lay on the bed crying harder than I had in months. Everything I'd done to get back at Tori had backfired, and now nobody respected either of us. I thought about how I'd spent $300 on clothes for this trip, and used vacation days from work just to end up alone in a hotel room with nothing to show for it. The modeling agency opportunity was gone, and my friendships were damaged, and I couldn't even feel good about getting revenge because it had cost me everything. I fell asleep still wearing the cheap sundress with my makeup smeared all over my face. The next morning was our last full day in Miami, and I woke up knowing I had to apologize to the group. I couldn't fix things with Tori yet, but I could at least own up to what I'd done wrong. I got dressed and went down to breakfast at the hotel restaurant where everyone was sitting together at a big table. My heart pounded as I walked over and they all looked up at me. I asked if I could say something and Sterling nodded, so I stood there feeling like everyone was staring at me. I told them I was sorry for my part in making this trip miserable for everyone. My voice shook, but I kept going and admitted to sending the fake message to Alex from Tori's phone. I explained how I'd mixed up all of Tori's outfits because I wanted to make her look bad, the way she'd made me look bad. The group was quiet, and I could see surprise on their faces that I was actually confessing to everything. Some of them looked at me with respect for being honest, but there was also disappointment in their eyes like they'd expected better from me. I told them I was sorry for my part in ruining the trip, and admitted to sending the fake message and sabotaging Tori's outfits. The group looked surprised that I was confessing, and I could see a mix of respect and continued disappointment on their faces. Tori sat completely still at the other end of the table, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. She didn't say anything, didn't move, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. When I finished talking and sat back down, my hands shaking a little from the adrenaline, Tori stood up without a word. She put her napkin on the table, picked up her phone, and walked out of the restaurant. The door closed behind her and everyone turned to look at me. I felt my face get hot because I'd hoped she might at least acknowledge what I'd said, maybe even apologize for her own behavior, but she'd just left. Reagan leaned over and put her hand on my arm. She told me it took guts to admit what I did, but actions have consequences and I need to accept that people might not trust me the same way anymore. I nodded because she was right, and I knew it. The breakfast conversation moved on to other topics, but I barely heard any of it. I kept thinking about Tori walking out and wondering if she'd ever speak to me again. After breakfast, I spent the whole day trying to make up for everything. I offered to pay for lunch when we went to this little Cuban place near the beach, and everyone seemed surprised but grateful. I suggested we do the sunset boat tour that Kiana had mentioned wanting to do on the first day, and she smiled at me like maybe I wasn't completely terrible. I carried bags when we went shopping, held doors open, bought rounds of drinks at the beach bar. I was trying so hard to show everyone that I wasn't just the person who'd sabotaged her own sister. Holly walked with me for a while and told me she appreciated the effort, but it would take time for things to feel normal again. I understood that. Fiona asked if I was okay, and I said yes, even though I wasn't really. The whole day felt exhausting because I was being extra nice to everyone while also watching Tori from a distance. Tori spent the entire day with Jenna, the two of them always walking ahead of the group, or sitting at the far end of tables. I noticed she hadn't apologized for leaving my luggage or stealing my credit card, and as the day went on, I realized she probably never would. She kept laughing extra loud at things Jenna said and posting photos on her phone like she was having the best time ever. It was obvious she was making a point of showing everyone how unbothered she was by my apology. When we were at the beach, she made sure to sit where I could see her having fun, and every time I glanced over, she'd throw her head back laughing at something. It felt calculated, like she wanted me to know that my confession hadn't affected her at all. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I'd owned up to everything I'd done wrong, and she was acting like she'd been the victim all along with no responsibility for starting this whole mess. That night, Mia organized a final group dinner at a nice restaurant with outdoor seating overlooking the water. She'd made reservations weeks ago, back when we all thought this trip would be fun and drama-free. The atmosphere was better than it had been the last few days, with people actually talking and laughing together instead of the awkward silence we'd been dealing with. But there was still obvious tension between Tori and me. We sat at opposite ends of the long table, and neither of us looked at each other during the meal. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu because I was still dealing with my maxed-out credit card situation, while Tori ordered an expensive steak and acted like everything was perfect in her world. Sterling kept trying to include both of us in conversations, asking questions that required us to interact, but Tori would answer while looking at everyone except me. During dessert, Sterling stood up with his wine glass and said he wanted to make a toast. He talked about friendship and forgiveness, about how we all make mistakes, and what matters is how we handle them afterward. He didn't mention Tori and me specifically, but everyone at the table knew exactly what he was talking about. People nodded along and raised their glasses, and I felt grateful that Sterling was trying to smooth things over, even though it was probably too late. Tori smiled during the toast, but it didn't reach her eyes. When everyone clinked glasses, she clinked with Jenna and Kiana, but deliberately skipped me even though I was holding my glass out. It was such a small thing, but it stung more than I expected. After dinner, we all walked outside to look at the boats in the marina. The sun had set and the lights on the water looked pretty, reflecting off the waves. I stood by the railing taking photos on my phone when Tori suddenly appeared next to me. My stomach dropped because we hadn't been alone since the breakfast confrontation. She looked at the water instead of at me and said my apology to the group was nice, but I still owed her a personal apology for the message to Alex. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made me nervous. I turned to face her and apologized directly for sending the fake message and for mixing up all her outfits. I told her I was sorry for stooping to her level and making everything worse. Then I waited, watching her face, expecting her to apologize for the luggage and the credit card. The silence stretched out between us while the water lapped against the boats below. She finally looked at me and just said, "Okay." Then she walked away, back toward where Jenna was standing, leaving me alone at the railing. Holly must have been watching because she came over right after Tori left. She stood next to me, and we both looked out at the water for a minute before she said anything. Then she told me that Tori had admitted to her earlier that afternoon that she did leave my luggage on purpose. My hands gripped the railing hard because hearing it confirmed out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Holly explained that Tori feels justified because she thinks I've always gotten more attention and opportunities than her. She said Tori believes our parents favor me and that she's constantly competing with me for recognition. I felt anger rising in my chest because even if that were true, it didn't excuse sabotaging me and stealing my money. I started to say something about how unfair it was that Tori wouldn't take responsibility, but Holly cut me off. Holly pointed out that I can't control Tori's behavior, only my own. She said the important thing is that I owned up to my mistakes, even if Tori won't do the same. I knew she was right, but it frustrated me, so much that Tori got to play the victim when she'd started everything. Holly squeezed my shoulder and said that sometimes people aren't ready to admit what they've done wrong, and pushing them just makes them dig in harder. She suggested I focus on rebuilding trust with our friends instead of waiting for Tori to apologize, because that might never happen. I nodded and tried to let go of the anger, but it sat heavy in my chest for the rest of the night. When we all headed back to the hotel, Tori walked ahead with Jenna, and I walked behind with Holly and Mia, and the distance between us felt bigger than it had been at the start of the trip. Flight home, I sat in the back of the plane staring out the window while Tori stayed in her seat near the front. The whole group spread out across different rows, and nobody really talked much during the flight. I kept thinking about how the vacation started versus how it ended, and the difference made my stomach hurt. When we landed back home, everyone said quick goodbyes in the baggage claim area and headed to their cars. Mia hugged me and said she'd text later, but her voice sounded tired and sad. I grabbed my new cheap suitcase that I'd bought in Miami to carry home the few things I'd managed to get, and Tori walked past me without saying anything. The drive home with my parents were quiet and awkward because they could tell something had gone wrong on the trip. My mom kept asking if I had fun, and I just said it was fine and stared out the window. When we got home, I went straight to my room and unpacked my sad little collection of Miami clothes. The cheap sundress looked even worse in my bedroom light, and I shoved it to the back of my closet. 2 days later, my credit card company called asking about the charges in Miami. I had to explain that my sister used my card without permission, and they started a fraud investigation that required paperwork and phone calls. My parents found out about the whole situation when the credit card company contacted them as secondary cardholders. They called both Tori and me into the living room for a family meeting, and their faces looked more disappointed than angry. My dad asked us to explain what happened on the trip, and both Tori and I started talking at once, trying to blame each other. Mom held up her hand and said we'd each get a turn to speak without interrupting. I went first and told them about the luggage, the credit card, and how Tori had sabotaged me because she wanted the internship with Alex. Then Tori explained her side, admitting she left my luggage on purpose but saying I deserved it because I always got more attention and opportunities. She also admitted to using my credit card but claimed she thought I'd said it was okay. My parents sat quietly through both explanations, and when we finished, Dad said we needed professional help to work through our issues. He scheduled family therapy sessions for us, and neither Tori nor I could argue because we'd both acted terribly. The first therapy session happened the following week in a small office with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. The therapist was a middle-aged woman who asked us to explain our relationship, and both Tori and I struggled to find positive things to say. We spent most of that first session just listing complaints about each other while the therapist took notes. She said our competitive dynamic had been building for years and wouldn't fix itself overnight. Over the next few months, we had weekly sessions where the therapist helped us understand why we kept trying to hurt each other. Tori admitted she'd always felt like I was the favorite child, and that our parents praised me more for everything I did. I explained that I never knew she felt that way, and thought she was the confident one who didn't care what anyone thought. The therapist pointed out that we'd been so focused on competing that we never actually talked to each other about our feelings. The credit card situation got resolved when the company ruled in my favor and made Tori pay back the money. She was furious about having to set up a payment plan, but she did it without fighting. 3 months after Miami, things between us were better, but still weird. We could be in the same room without fighting, and we even had a few normal conversations about random stuff like TV shows. Then Mia sent out invitations to her birthday party in July, and both Tori and I got invited. I almost didn't go because I worried it would be awkward with the whole friend group, but Holly texted saying everyone wanted to see me. The party was at Mia's house with decorations in the backyard and a table full of food. I showed up a little late because I was nervous, and when I walked into the backyard, I saw Tori already there talking to Jenna. Our eyes met across the yard, and we both gave each other small nods before looking away. The party felt surprisingly normal as people talked and laughed like the Miami trip hadn't happened. Holly came over to me while I was getting punch and said she was proud of how I'd handled everything. She mentioned that going to therapy showed real growth, and she was glad we were still friends. Her words made me feel less anxious about being there. Later in the evening, Tori and I ended up standing next to each other by the food table. Neither of us said anything for a minute, just pretending to look at the snacks. Then Tori quietly said, maybe we should try to stop competing over every single thing in our lives. I agreed and said we probably wouldn't ever be super close sisters, but we could at least stop trying to destroy each other. She nodded and grabbed a cookie, and we stood there eating in silence for a moment before other people joined us. As I drove home that night, I kept thinking about the Miami trip and everything that happened after. The revenge I'd planned felt good for about 5 minutes, but then it just made everything worse for everyone. I'd become exactly like Tori, doing the same sneaky, mean things she'd done to me, and it didn't fix anything or make me feel better. Both of us were working on being less terrible to each other in therapy, and while our relationship was still complicated and probably always would be, at least we were moving forward instead of constantly tearing each other down. The Miami trip taught me that becoming like the person who hurt you just means everyone loses, and sometimes the best revenge is just being better than that.